Maria Santos had always been invisible at St. Mary's General Hospital, and that's exactly how she wanted it. For 8 years, she'd mopped the same floors, emptied the same trash bins, and cleaned the same blood-stained gurneys with hands that moved with surgical precision nobody else seemed to notice. But when armed gunmen stormed through the emergency room doors on that rainy Tuesday night, the quiet janitor would reveal skills that could only belong to someone trained to kill and save lives in equal measure. Before we jump back in, tell US where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's General Hospital cast their familiar harsh glow across the polished linoleum floors as Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor. It was 11:47 p.m., deep into the night shift that had become her sanctuary for nearly a decade. The hospital at this hour was a different world, quieter, more intimate, where the drama of day shift medicine gave way to the steady rhythm of overnight healing. Maria moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had walked these halls thousands of times, but her movements held something else, a controlled grace that spoke of training far beyond janitorial work. At 34, she was lean and compact, her dark hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail beneath a faded baseball cap that bore the hospital's logo. Her brown eyes held a watchfulness that seemed out of place for someone whose job was to clean up after others, constantly scanning, assessing, cataloging details that most people would miss. Tonight, like every night, she wore the same uniform. Navy blue scrubs, comfortable sneakers that made no sound on the polished floors, and a utility belt loaded with cleaning supplies. But those who looked closely might notice that her hands moved with the precision of someone who had once worked with much more delicate instruments than mops and disinfectant bottles. The emergency department was Maria's final stop each night, and she approached it with the same methodical care she brought to every task. Through the glass doors, she could see Dr. Elena Rodriguez finishing up with a patient, her movements quick and confident as she sutured a laceration. Maria had watched Dr. Rodriguez work hundreds of times, always from a distance, always invisible. The doctor was brilliant, one of the best trauma surgeons Maria had ever observed, and she had observed many. As Maria began her cleaning routine, she noticed details that the medical staff had long stopped seeing. The way the new security guard, Harrison, favored his left leg, probably an old injury that would slow him down in a crisis. The fact that the backup generator had been making a slight vibration for 3 days, indicating a bearing that would fail within the week. The subtle tells that distinguished real patients from potential threats. Posture, eye movement, the way hands rested or fidgeted. These observations came automatically, involuntarily, like breathing. They were the product of training so intensive and specialized that it had become hardwired into her nervous system. Training that officially had never existed, for operations that had never happened, in service of a country that had disavowed her when things went wrong. Maria Santos was not her real name. It was a carefully constructed identity, complete with employment history, references, and a backstory that could withstand casual investigation. The woman who had earned the call sign Lifeline during classified operations in Eastern Europe had died in a helicopter crash 8 years ago, according to official records. But that woman's skills, her ability to perform battlefield surgery under fire, to read tactical situations in seconds, to move through hostile territory like a ghost, those skills lived on in the quiet janitor who cleaned trauma rooms and listened to the stories whispered in hospital corridors. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had spent years saving lives in the most dangerous places on earth, only to find herself saving lives again in the sterile safety of a Chicago hospital. But here, her healing came through different means, ensuring that operating rooms were spotless, that equipment was properly sterilized, that the environment itself contributed to patient survival. It was honest work, invisible work, And it had given her something she'd never had in her previous life: peace. The patients who passed through St. Mary's Emergency Department came from every walk of life. Gang members with gunshot wounds lay next to suburban mothers with kitchen accidents. Homeless veterans battled infections while executives recovered from heart attacks. Maria had cleaned blood from the floors where all of them had bled, and she had learned to see past the circumstances that brought them here to the fundamental humanity they shared. Sometimes, late at night when the department was quiet, she would catch herself studying medical procedures with an intensity that went beyond casual interest. Her hands would move unconsciously, mimicking the motions she observed, muscle memory surfacing from operations where she had worked to save teammates under enemy fire. Dr. Rodriguez had noticed once, commenting that Maria seemed to have an unusual understanding of medical procedures for a janitor. Maria had deflected with a smile and a story about growing up in a family of nurses. The truth was more complicated. Maria had been a Special Forces medic before she had been anything else, trained to provide advanced trauma care in conditions that would challenge seasoned emergency room doctors. She could perform field surgery with a knife and dental floss, set broken bones with improvised splints, and keep someone alive with whatever materials were at hand. These skills had made her invaluable to her unit, earning her the call sign Lifeline and a reputation for bringing everyone home alive. But that life had ended abruptly when Operation Silent Shield went sideways. Her team had been betrayed, sold out to enemy forces by someone in their own command structure. Good soldiers had died because of that betrayal, and Maria had been forced to disappear to avoid joining them. The official story was that Sergeant Maria Vasquez had died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise. The unofficial truth was that she had been marked for elimination by the same forces that had destroyed her team. Now, as she cleaned the emergency department that had become her world, Maria allowed herself to believe that the past had finally stayed buried. 8 years was a long time. People forgot. Files got archived. The wars that had shaped her had given way to new conflicts, new secrets, new betrayals. She had built a life here, not glamorous, not exciting, but hers. She finished cleaning the trauma bays and moved toward the supply closet to restock her cart. The night was quiet, peaceful in the way that hospital nights could be when no major emergencies were unfolding. Dr. Rodriguez was finishing her paperwork. The nurses were checking on patients, and the security guard was making his rounds. Everything was normal, routine, safe. Maria had no way of knowing that 3 blocks away, a black SUV was pulling into the hospital parking lot. She couldn't see the men inside checking their weapons, reviewing building schematics, or confirming the identity of their primary target. She was unaware that the peaceful life she had built was about to collide with the violent past she had tried so hard to leave behind. As she loaded fresh towels into her cart, Maria felt a familiar unease, the same sensation that had kept her alive through dozens of missions in hostile territory. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. The feeling of being watched, of danger approaching like a storm front on a clear horizon. She paused, listening to the familiar sounds of the hospital at night. Everything seemed normal, but her instincts, honed by years of training and survival, told her otherwise. Something was wrong. Something was coming. And in that moment, Maria Santos, the invisible janitor, began the transformation back into Lifeline. The soldier who had never learned how to leave anyone behind. The unease followed Maria through the remainder of her shift like a shadow she couldn't shake. She had learned long ago to trust her instincts. They had kept her alive in places where trusting the wrong person or missing the wrong signal meant death. But 8 years of peaceful routine had dulled the sharp edge of constant vigilance, and she found herself questioning whether her paranoia was justified or simply the ghost of a life she'd tried to forget. At 3:17 a.m., that question was answered. In the most dramatic way possible, Maria was restocking medical supplies and trauma. Bay 3 when she heard Dr. Rodriguez's sharp intake of breath from the neighboring bay. Through the thin partition, she could hear the doctor speaking in rapid, urgent Spanish to a patient who had just been brought in by ambulance. The words were familiar to Maria, not just the language, but the specific medical terminology that Dr. Rodriguez was using to describe what appeared to be a gunshot wound. Entry wound consistent with high-velocity rifle round, Dr. Rodriguez was saying to the attending nurse. Trajectory suggests the shooter was positioned at elevation, probably a rooftop. This wasn't random street violence. Maria's hands stilled. On the gauze packages she was organizing. High-velocity rifle round, elevated position. The clinical description triggered memories she had worked hard to suppress, memories of treating similar wounds in urban combat zones, of tracking sniper positions, of the way professional killers worked. She moved closer to the partition, her cleaning forgotten. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see the patient. A man in his 40s, Hispanic, wearing clothes that suggested he was neither wealthy nor poor. But it was his hands that caught Maria's attention, scarred, calloused in specific ways. That spoke of weapons training and hard living. His tattoos were partially visible beneath the blood-soaked clothing, and Maria recognized military unit insignia, mixed with symbols she had learned to read during her time in special operations. This wasn't a random victim. This was a soldier, or former soldier, and someone had tried very hard to kill him. "Doctor," the patient wheezed, grabbing Dr. Rodriguez's wrist with surprising strength. "They're coming. Tonight, the hospital." "Not safe," Dr. Rodriguez tried to calm him, assuming he was delirious from blood loss and trauma. But Maria heard something in his voice that the doctor missed, the clarity of someone delivering a warning, not the rambling of someone in shock. "Sir, you need to stay calm," Dr. Rodriguez said, preparing a sedative. "You're safe now. You're in the hospital." "No," the man insisted, his voice growing stronger despite his injuries. "They followed me here. They know I came here. They'll come for her." "For who?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, but the man was losing consciousness, the combination of blood loss and medication taking hold. Maria's blood went cold. The timing was too convenient, too precise. A former soldier showing up at her hospital with a sniper wound, talking about people coming for her. In her previous life, she would have called it actionable intelligence. In her current life, she called it a death sentence arriving right on schedule. She slipped back into the supply closet and activated the emergency protocols she had hoped never to use. Hidden behind a false panel in the cleaning cart was a secure satellite phone, ancient by current standards, but still functional. She powered it up and sent a single coded message to a number she had memorized but never called. "Lifeline to Ghost. Package compromised. Immediate extraction required." The response came back within 30 seconds. "Ghost to Lifeline. Negative on extraction. Too hot. Hunker down and wait for all clear." Maria stared at the phone's small screen, processing the implications. If Ghost Tommy Martinez, her former teammate and the only person who knew she was alive, was telling her that extraction was impossible, then whatever was coming was bigger than a simple assassination attempt. This was a full-scale operation. She deleted the messages and returned the phone to its hiding place, her mind already shifting into tactical mode. The hospital had approximately 300 people inside at this hour: patients, staff, security, and visitors. The building had multiple entry points, but the emergency department was the most vulnerable. If someone wanted to infiltrate St. Mary's while maintaining plausible cover, they would come through the R. Maria began moving through the department with new purpose, ostensibly continuing her cleaning routine, but actually conducting the security assessment. The emergency department had two main entrances: the public entrance through the lobby, and the ambulance bay where emergency vehicles delivered patients. Both were monitored by security cameras and had card access controls, but neither would stop a determined professional. The current security staff consisted of Bob Harrison, the overweight guard she had observed earlier, and Janet Mills, a capable but small woman whose primary experience was dealing with unruly visitors rather than armed intruders. The hospital's main security office was on the ground floor, but the emergency department relied on local presence rather than central monitoring as she worked. Maria found herself cataloging potential weapons and defensive positions with the automatic efficiency of her old training. Medical scissors could serve as improvised knives. Oxygen tanks could be weaponized. The heavy crash carts could provide mobile cover. The pharmaceutical lockup contained sedatives that could incapacitate an attacker if properly administered. But more than weapons, she was thinking about the people she would need to protect. Dr. Rodriguez was brilliant and decisive, but she had no tactical training. The nurses were competent medical professionals, but they weren't prepared for violence. The patients in the emergency department included an elderly man with chest pain, a teenage girl with a broken arm, and 3 other individuals in various stages of treatment. At 4:23 a.m., Maria's preparations were interrupted by the arrival of another ambulance. She watched through the windows as paramedics unloaded a patient who appeared to be unconscious. But something about the scene felt wrong. The paramedics' movements were too coordinated, too military, and the patient on the stretcher was positioned in a way that suggested he was ready to move quickly if necessary. Maria grabbed her radio and switched to the hospital's internal frequency. "Security to emergency. This is maintenance. I need someone to verify the ambulance that just arrived. License plate and crew identification." Bob Harrison's voice crackled back through the radio. "Maintenance. This is security. Why are you requesting verification on a medical transport?" "Just humor me," Maria replied, knowing she couldn't explain her suspicions without revealing her background. A few minutes later, Harrison's voice returned, but now it carried a note of concern. "Maintenance, we have a problem. That ambulance isn't in our system. The license plate comes back to a vehicle that was reported stolen 3 hours ago." Maria's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The wounded soldier hadn't been followed to the hospital. He had been chased here, probably as part of a larger plan to flush out whoever he was trying to warn. And now the hunters had arrived, disguised as the very people the hospital was designed to trust. She moved quickly to the nurse's station and caught Dr. Rodriguez's attention. "Doctor, I need you to listen carefully and not ask questions. That ambulance crew that just arrived, they're not real paramedics. You need to initiate a lockdown immediately." Dr. Rodriguez looked at her with confusion and growing alarm. "Maria, what are you talking about? How would you know?" "Because I've seen this before," Maria said quietly. "Please, trust me. Lock down the department and get everyone away from the main entrances." Before Dr. Rodriguez could respond, the lights in the emergency department suddenly cut out, plunging the area into darkness except for the pale glow of emergency lighting. In that moment, Maria heard the sound that confirmed her worst fears. The distinctive click of weapons being readied, echoing from multiple positions around the department. The hunt had begun. The emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow that transformed the familiar hospital corridors into something from a nightmare. Maria's training kicked in immediately, her body moving with muscle memory that had been dormant for 8 years but never forgotten. She dropped to a crouch behind the nurse's station, pulling Dr. Rodriguez down with her just as the first gunshots shattered the silence. "Stay down and don't move," Maria whispered to the terrified doctor, her voice carrying an authority that Dr. Rodriguez had never heard from the quiet janitor. "They're professionals. They know exactly what they're doing." Through the glass doors of the emergency department, Maria could see muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness of the main lobby. The fake paramedics had shed their medical disguises, and were now moving through the hospital with military precision, their weapons sweeping in coordinated patterns that spoke of extensive tactical training. Maria counted at least 6 shooters, possibly more. They wore black tactical gear and moved with the fluid coordination of a unit that had worked together before. This wasn't a random attack or a desperate robbery gone wrong. This was a professional operation with specific objectives. "Maria," Dr. Rodriguez whispered, her voice shaking. "What's happening? Who are these people?" "People who shouldn't be here," Maria replied, her eyes tracking the movements of the gunmen through the red-tinted darkness. "And they're looking for someone specific." The wounded soldier from earlier had been right. They had followed him here. But Maria was beginning to suspect that he hadn't been the primary target. He had been bait, designed to draw someone else into the open. Someone who had been invisible for 8 years, but whose skills would be unmistakable once revealed. One of the gunmen approached the nurse's station, his weapon raised and ready. Maria could see his face clearly now, young, maybe late 20s, with the cold eyes of someone who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. He was scanning the area methodically, looking for targets or threats. Maria made a split-second decision that would change everything. As the gunman rounded the corner of the nurse's station, she moved with lightning speed, grabbing a medical cart and shoving it directly into his path. He stumbled, momentarily off balance, and Maria used that instant to disarm him with a move that was pure special forces, a precise strike to his wrist that caused him to drop his weapon, followed by a chokehold that left him unconscious in less than 10 seconds. Dr. Rodriguez stared in shock as Maria quickly searched the unconscious gunman, removing his radio, backup weapon, and tactical gear with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Jesus Christ, Doctor," Rodriguez breathed. "Who are you?" "Right now, I'm someone trying to keep you alive," Maria replied, checking the gunman's radio for intelligence. The chatter she heard confirmed her worst fears. This was a multi-team operation with specific objectives and extraction plans. "Target confirmed in the building," a voice crackled through the radio. "Lifeline is active. Repeat, lifeline is active." Maria's blood went cold. They knew her call sign. They knew exactly who they were hunting. She grabbed Dr. Rodriguez by the arm and pulled her toward the medical supply room. "We need to get the patients and staff to safety." "How many people are in the department right now?" 8 patients, 6 staff members," Dr. Rodriguez replied automatically, her medical training helping her function despite the terror. "Maria, I don't understand what's happening." "I'll explain later. Right now we need to evacuate everyone to the most secure area of the hospital." "Where's the safest place?" Dr. Rodriguez thought quickly. "The surgical suite on the 3rd floor. It's reinforced, has its own security systems, and there's only one way in." "Good. We're going to move everyone there, but we need to do it without being detected." Maria checked the unconscious gunman's weapon, a military-grade assault rifle, with modifications that weren't available to civilians. "How well do you know the hospital's layout?" "Better than anyone. I've worked here for 6 years. Service corridors, maintenance passages, ways to move people without using the main hallways." Dr. Rodriguez nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "There's a freight elevator that connects to the service corridors. It goes directly to the surgical floor." Maria smiled grimly. "Perfect. Here's what we're going to do." Over the next 20 minutes, Maria orchestrated an evacuation that would have impressed her old Special Forces instructors. Using Dr. Rodriguez's knowledge of the hospital and her own tactical expertise, they moved the patients and staff through a maze of service corridors and maintenance passages, avoiding the gunmen who were systematically searching the main areas of the hospital. The elderly man with chest pain was transported on a gurney, with Maria and a nurse working together to keep the 4th line stable during the movement. The teenage girl with the broken arm helped support another patient who was too weak to walk alone. Dr. Rodriguez led the group, using her medical authority to keep everyone calm and focused. But as they reached the freight elevator, Maria heard something that made her stomach drop, the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching the hospital. She grabbed the radio she had taken from the unconscious gunman and listened to the tactical chatter. "Overwatch is in position," a voice reported. "All exits are covered. No one gets out until the primary objective is achieved." "Copy that," came the response. "Continue sweep of floors 1 through 5. Target is contained but not secured." Maria realized that the situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. This wasn't just a hit squad, it was a full-scale military operation with air support and perimeter control. Someone had committed serious resources to finding her, which meant that whatever she knew or represented was worth killing dozens of innocent people to obtain. As the freight elevator rose toward the surgical floor, Maria made a decision that went against every instinct that had kept her alive for the past 8 years. Instead of continuing to hide, instead of trying to escape, she was going to fight back. Too many innocent people were in danger, and she was the only one with the skills to protect them. "Dr. Rodriguez," she said quietly as the elevator climbed, "once we get everyone secured, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you handle that?" The doctor looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "Maria, whoever you really are, these people came here because of you, didn't they?" Maria nodded. "Yes, and I'm going to make sure they regret it." The elevator reached the 3rd floor, and Maria began the process of transforming from invisible janitor to the warrior she had once been. The hospital had become a battlefield, and Lifeline was about to remind everyone why that call sign had once struck fear into the hearts of America's enemies. But first, she had to make sure that the innocent people under her protection would survive what was coming next. The surgical suite on the 3rd floor of St. Mary's Hospital had been designed as a sterile sanctuary where life and death decisions were made with precision and skill. Tonight, it would serve a different purpose as a fortress where a former Special Forces medic would make her last stand against an enemy that had hunted her across 8 years and half a continent. Maria moved through the surgical suite with the confidence of someone who belonged there, quickly assessing the space for defensive advantages. The reinforced doors could be secured from the inside. The surgical instruments could serve as weapons if necessary. Most importantly, the suite had its own communication system that bypassed the hospital's main network. "Everyone stay calm and quiet," Maria announced to the group of patients and staff she had evacuated. "We're going to be here for a while, but you're safe as long as you follow my instructions." Dr. Rodriguez pulled Maria aside, her voice urgent but controlled. "I need answers right now. Those men downstairs, they're not random criminals. They knew your name, your call sign, and you handled that gunman like you'd done it 1,000 times before." Maria looked at the doctor for a long moment, weighing how much truth she could reveal without putting everyone in greater danger. "My real name is Maria Vasquez. 8 years ago, I was a Special Forces medic with the 75th Ranger Regiment. My call sign was Lifeline. Officially, I died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise. Unofficially, I was marked for elimination because I knew too much about operations that were supposed to stay buried." Dr. Rodriguez processed this information with the same analytical precision she brought to medical diagnoses. "And now they've found you. Not just found me. They've committed serious resources to eliminating me military contractors, air support, perimeter control. This isn't about revenge or tying up loose ends. This is about something bigger." Before Dr. Rodriguez could respond, the surgical suite's communication system crackled to life. A voice that Maria recognized with a chill of dread filled the room. "Maria Vasquez, call sign Lifeline. This is Colonel David Kane. I know you can hear me." Maria's hands clenched into fists. Kane, the officer who had betrayed Operation Silent Shield, who had sold out her team for career advancement and classified information, the man she had thought was dead. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience over the years," Kane continued, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages. "But tonight that ends. You have something I need, and I have something you care about: innocent lives." Maria moved to the communication panel and keyed the microphone. "Kane, I should have known you were too much of a coward to die with the rest of the team you betrayed. Ah, there's the Maria I remember. Always so direct, so moral. It was that inflexibility that made you a liability then, and it's what's going to get you killed now. What do you want? You know what I want. The files from Operation Silent Shield. The evidence you collected before everything went sideways. I know you didn't die in that helicopter crash. You're too stubborn to die that easily. And I know you kept insurance, documentation that could implicate certain individuals in activities that were necessary for national security." Maria felt a cold realization settle over her. The files, encrypted drives containing evidence of Kane's betrayal, records of illegal operations, financial transactions that proved the scope of the corruption within their command structure. She had hidden them years ago as insurance, never imagining they would become the focus of a full-scale military operation. "I don't have any files," she lied smoothly. Kane's laughter echoed through the surgical suite. "Maria, we both know that's not true. Sergeant Tommy Martinez was quite informative before he died. He told us about your insurance policy, about the dead man switch you set up to release everything if something happened to you." Maria's world tilted. Tommy was dead. Her last link to her former life, the only person who knew she was alive, had been murdered by the same man who had destroyed her team 8 years ago. "When?" she asked quietly. 3 days ago. He lasted longer than expected. Rangers are tough that way. But eventually, everyone breaks. He told us about your little hideout, about the hospital where you've been playing janitor, about the encrypted files you've been keeping as insurance." Dr. Rodriguez watched Maria's face transform, seeing something cold and dangerous replace the controlled calm that had characterized her actions so far. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was personal. "Here's my offer," Kane continued. "You give me the location of those files, and I'll make sure the hospital staff and patients survive this encounter. You try to be a hero, and I'll turn this place into a war zone. My men have already secured the building. There's no escape, no rescue coming. Just you, me, and a choice." Maria looked around the surgical suite at the faces of the people she had sworn to protect. Dr. Rodriguez, whose only crime had been working the night shift. The elderly man with chest pain, who reminded her of her grandfather. The teenage girl with the broken arm, who couldn't be more than 17. "I need time to think," she said into the microphone. "You have 10 minutes. After that, I start killing hostages." The communication went dead, leaving the surgical suite in tense silence. Maria stood motionless for a moment, her mind racing through tactical options and strategic possibilities. Everyone in the room was looking at her, waiting for her to somehow solve an impossible situation. Dr. Rodriguez approached her cautiously. "Maria, what are these files? What's so important that someone would do all this? Evidence of war crimes." Maria replied simply, "Proof that Kane and others in our command structure were running illegal operations, selling weapons to enemies, getting American soldiers killed for profit. The files could bring down careers and administrations, maybe even prevent future operations like the one that killed my team. And you've been keeping them secret for 8 years? As insurance. If Kane or his people ever found me, the files would be automatically released to journalists in congressional oversight committees. It was supposed to keep me safe." Dr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. But now he's calling your bluff. No, Maria said, moving to one of the surgical instrument trays and selecting a scalpel with practiced precision. He just made the mistake of thinking I was bluffing. She turned to face the group, and for the first time since the crisis began, she allowed them to see exactly who she really was, not Maria Santos the janitor, but Lifeline, the soldier who had earned her call sign by never losing a patient, never leaving anyone behind, and never backing down from a fight. Dr. Rodriguez, I need you to prepare the surgical suite for emergency procedures. We're going to have casualties before this is over. What are you going to do? Maria checked the scalpel's edge with the automatic precision of someone who had used such instruments to save lives and, when necessary, to take them. I'm going to remind Colonel Kane why they called me Lifeline and why that was the last name his enemies ever heard. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The 10 minutes that Kane had given her felt both eternal and instantaneous. Maria used every second to transform the surgical suite into something that would have made her old instructors proud, a defensive position that maximized her advantages, while minimizing the enemy's options for assault. Working with Dr. Rodriguez, she repositioned the surgical tables to create cover and clear fields of fire. The elderly patient with chest pain was moved to the safest corner of the suite, his 4 lines carefully maintained by one of the nurses who had found her courage in the crisis. The teenage girl with the broken arm was helping to organize medical supplies, her fear replaced by determination to be useful. Maria, Dr. Rodriguez said quietly as they worked, if these files are so important, why don't you just give him what he wants? Maybe he'll let everyone go. Maria paused in her preparation, looking at the doctor with eyes that held 8 years of hard-earned wisdom. Because Kane never lets anyone go. He didn't become a colonel by leaving loose ends alive. The moment I give him those files, everyone in this room becomes a liability. She moved to the surgical suite's computer terminal and began accessing systems with a familiarity that surprised Dr. Rodriguez. Maria's fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols with techniques that were definitely not part of janitor training. What are you doing? Evening the odds, Maria replied, accessing the hospital's building management system. Kane thinks he has all the advantages: numbers, weapons, air support, but he's fighting on my turf now. The hospital's environmental controls came online under Maria's command. She began systematically shutting down elevators, sealing fire doors, and redirecting airflow patterns in ways that would confuse and disorient anyone trying to navigate the building. 8 years of working in St. Mary's had given her an intimate knowledge of every system, every shortcut, every vulnerability. More importantly, she activated the hospital's emergency medical protocols, sending automatic distress signals to police, fire, and federal agencies. Kane might have the building surrounded, but he couldn't control every radio frequency or block every emergency transmission. The communication system crackled back to life exactly 10 minutes after Kane's ultimatum had begun. Time's up, Maria. I hope you've made the right choice. Maria keyed the microphone, her voice carrying a calm authority that made everyone in the surgical suite stand a little straighter. Kane, I've got a counteroffer for you. I'm listening. You and your men leave the hospital immediately. Take your helicopters, your tactical gear, and your delusions of competence and disappear. In exchange, I won't kill every last one of you. The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Kane's laughter filled the room. Maria, you always did have more courage than sense. But you're outnumbered 20 to 1, trapped in a room with civilians and facing professional soldiers with military-grade equipment. 20 to 1? Maria's voice carried a note of amusement that chilled everyone who heard it. Kane, you brought 20 men to kill one janitor? I'm almost flattered. Give me the location of the files, or I start executing hostages. The files are in a safety deposit box in Geneva, Switzerland. The key is hidden in my apartment. But here's the thing, Kane. Even if you get them, you'll never make it out of Chicago alive. Why is that? Maria smiled, and Dr. Rodriguez saw something in that expression that reminded her why this woman had once been considered one of the military's most dangerous operators. Because while you've been hunting me, I've been documenting you. Every communication you've made tonight, every tactical decision, every violation of federal law. It's all been recorded and transmitted to some very interested parties. This was partially true. Maria had indeed been recording Kane's communications and transmitting them through encrypted channels. But the real trap she was setting was far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. You're bluffing. Am I? Check your secure communications, Kane. I think you'll find some very interesting messages waiting for you. There was a pause, followed by the sound of urgent radio chatter in the background of Kane's transmission. Maria had used her access to the hospital's communication systems to flood Kane's tactical frequencies with false information, creating confusion and doubt within his team. More importantly, she had transmitted Kane's real-time location and operational details to contacts within federal law enforcement agencies, contacts who didn't know Maria Vasquez was alive, but who had been tracking Kane's illegal activities for years. Clever, Kane admitted, his voice tight with controlled anger, but ultimately pointless. Even if law enforcement responds, they'll find only the aftermath of a terrorist attack on a hospital. You and everyone with you will be dead. And I'll be long gone. That's where you're wrong, Kane. You made one critical mistake, which is, you assumed I was hiding in this surgical suite because I was trapped, but I'm not hiding from you anymore. Maria moved to the surgical suite's ventilation grate, removing it with tools she had retrieved from her janitor's cart. Behind the grate was a maintenance shaft that connected to the hospital's extensive ductwork system, a system she had mapped and memorized during 8 years of routine maintenance work. Dr. Rodriguez, she said quietly, lock this door behind me and don't open it for anyone except federal agents with proper identification. Keep everyone safe. Where are you going? Maria checked the scalpel she had selected earlier, testing its balance with the practiced motion of someone who had used such instruments for far more than surgery. I'm going hunting. She paused at the entrance to the maintenance shaft, looking back at the people she had sworn to protect. The elderly man with chest pain was sitting up, his color improved. The teenage girl was helping the nurses organize supplies with quiet efficiency. Dr. Rodriguez was checking on the other patients with the calm professionalism that made her such an excellent trauma surgeon. These were good people, innocent people who deserved to live through the night. And Maria was going to make sure they did, no matter what it cost her. Kane, she said into the communication system one final time, you wanted Lifeline. You're about to get her. She disappeared into the ventilation shaft, moving through the darkness with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years moving through hostile territory. Behind her, the surgical suite sealed itself like a fortress. Ahead of her, Kane's men were spread throughout the hospital, confident in their numbers and firepower. But they were about to learn that numbers and firepower meant nothing when you were being hunted by someone who knew every inch of the battlefield, who had been trained to turn hospitals into healing places and, when necessary, into killing grounds. Maria Vasquez, call sign Lifeline, was no longer hiding. She was hunting. And Kane's men were about to discover why the enemies of America's special forces learned to fear that particular call sign, usually in the last moments of their lives. The hospital had become a maze, and Maria was the predator moving through its corridors, carrying 8 years of suppressed rage and the skills to use it with surgical precision. Moving through the hospital's ventilation system was like traveling through the circulatory system of a living organism. Maria had spent countless hours during her 8 years as a janitor learning every duct, every passage, every maintenance corridor that connected the building's various sections. What had once been routine knowledge for cleaning and repairs now became tactical intelligence for urban warfare. The ductwork carried sound with surprising clarity, allowing her to track Kane's men as they moved through the hospital below. Their radio chatter revealed a methodical search pattern, professional, coordinated, but predictable. They were clearing rooms floor by floor, assuming their target was hiding rather than hunting. As she crawled through the narrow passage above the second floor, Maria allowed herself to remember Operation Silent Shield for the first time in years. The mission that had destroyed her old life and created the woman she had become. It had been a simple assignment, at least on paper. Her team, 8 Special Forces operators, including herself, had been tasked with extracting a high-value intelligence asset from a compound in the mountains of Eastern Europe. The asset claimed to have evidence of arms trafficking between American military contractors and hostile foreign governments, information that could prevent weapons from reaching terrorist organizations. What they hadn't known was that Colonel David Kane, their commanding officer, was one of the primary subjects of that intelligence. The asset they were risking their lives to extract had evidence that Kane was selling American military technology to the highest bidder. Regardless of their intentions toward the United States, the mission had been a setup from the beginning. Kane had sent them into a trap, hoping that the loss of the entire team would be explained as a tragic operational failure. The enemy forces had been waiting, positioned with precision that could only have come from detailed operational intelligence. Maria's team had fought their way out of the initial ambush, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. One by one, her teammates had fallen. Rodriguez, the explosives expert; Davidson, the communications specialist; Chun, the sniper, whose accuracy had saved them on a dozen previous missions. Each death had been a piece of Maria's soul torn away. Each loss a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. Tommy Martinez had been with her at the end, helping her extract the intelligence asset while the rest of their team held off enemy forces. They had made it to the extraction point, only to discover that their helicopter support had been canceled. No backup, no rescue, no acknowledgement that they had ever existed. The intelligence asset, a former contractor named Victor Petrov, had given Maria the encrypted files containing evidence of Kane's betrayal before he died from wounds sustained during the extraction. Maria and Tommy had been the only survivors, and they had made a pact. They would disappear, keep the evidence safe, and wait for the right moment to expose the truth. Tommy had taken a new identity and continued gathering intelligence on Kane's network. Maria had become a ghost, hiding in plain sight while maintaining the files that could bring down everyone involved in the conspiracy. For 8 years, it had worked, until Kane found Tommy and tortured him for information. Until tonight, when the past had finally caught up with her in the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital. Maria paused in her movement through the ductwork, listening to the radio chatter below. Kane's men were systematic but overconfident, moving with the arrogance of professionals who had never faced an opponent with her particular combination of skills and motivation. Team 2, report status. Kane's voice crackled through their communications. Second floor clear, no sign of the target. Team 3, first floor secured. Emergency department is under our control. Maria smiled grimly. They were treating this like a standard search and destroy operation, assuming their target would behave like a typical fugitive, hiding, running, waiting for rescue. They had no idea they were dealing with someone who had been trained to turn the hunter into the hunted. She reached a ventilation grate that opened into a supply closet on the second floor. Through the slats, she could see 2 of Kane's men positioned in the hallway, their weapons ready but their attention focused on the rooms they were systematically clearing. Maria removed the grate with practiced silence, dropping into the supply closet with movements that made no sound. The closet contained medical supplies, cleaning equipment, and most importantly, access to the hospital's internal communication system. She activated her janitor's radio. switching to the frequency that Kane's team was monitoring. When she spoke, her voice carried the cold authority of someone who had operated in the darkest corners of modern warfare. "Kane, this is Lifeline. Remember Operation Silent Shield? Remember how your intelligence was always so accurate? That wasn't luck, that was betrayal." The radio chatter stopped immediately, replaced by tense silence. "You sold out Rodriguez when he got too close to your arms-dealing network. You marked Davidson for elimination when he started asking questions about off-books funding. Chun died because you gave the enemy his exact position." "Maria," Kane's voice came back, carefully controlled but carrying an undertone of anger. "You're talking about classified operations that officially never happened. Just like tonight officially isn't happening. Just like Tommy Martinez officially didn't die screaming your name 3 days ago." Maria moved to the supply closet door, listening to the footsteps of Kane's men as they responded to their commander's orders. They were converging on her position, but she was already 3 moves ahead. "You know what I learned during Silent Shield, Kane? I learned that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one shooting at you from the front. It's the one giving orders from a command center, selling out his own people for profit." She opened the supply closet door and stepped into the hallway directly behind one of Kane's men. The scalpel moved with surgical precision, finding the gap between his body armor and helmet, applying pressure to a nerve cluster that dropped him unconscious without a sound. "But tonight's different, Kane. Tonight you're not giving orders from a safe distance. You're here, in my hospital, threatening my people. And that means I can finally give you what you've deserved for 8 years. The second gunman spun around at the sound of his partner hitting the floor, but Maria was already moving. She disarmed him with a technique that would have been familiar to any special forces operator, a precise combination of leverage and momentum that left him weaponless and unconscious in under 5 seconds. "Team 2, report." Kane's voice was sharp with concern. "Team 2, respond." Maria keyed the radio one final time before discarding it. "Kane, you trained me to be a weapon. You taught me to eliminate threats to American security. Congratulations, you've become one." She gathered the weapons and equipment from the 2 unconscious men, checking each piece with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this countless times in far more dangerous situations. Military-grade assault rifles, tactical radios, flashbang grenades, and enough ammunition for a small war. But more than weapons, she now had something even more valuable: confirmation that Kane's men were using standard military tactics and equipment. That meant they would be predictable, following protocols she knew as well as they did. Maria disappeared back into the hospital's maze of corridors and maintenance passages. But now she was no longer just evading capture. She was implementing a plan that would systematically dismantle Kane's operation, eliminate his tactical advantages, and force him into a confrontation where her knowledge of the hospital would matter more than his superior numbers. Operation Silent Shield had ended with betrayal and death 8 years ago. Tonight, in the corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, it would finally reach its conclusion. And this time, Maria intended to make sure that the only ghost remaining would be the memory of Colonel David Kane. Kane's voice echoed through the hospital's communication system with barely controlled fury. "All teams, converge on the 2nd floor. Target is armed and extremely dangerous. Rules of engagement are weapons-free, shoot to kill." Maria listened to the tactical chatter from her position in a maintenance corridor between the 2nd and 3rd floors, tracking the movement of Kane's men through their radio communications. They were abandoning their methodical search pattern, responding to their losses with increased aggression rather than tactical adaptation. It was exactly what she had expected and exactly what she had planned for. Professional soldiers were trained to follow protocols, to respond to threats according to established procedures. But Maria had helped write some of those procedures. More importantly, She understood their psychological limitations. Kane's men were skilled, but they were operating in an unfamiliar environment against an opponent who knew every sight line, every choke point, every tactical advantage the hospital offered. She moved through the service corridors with silent efficiency, using her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to stay ahead of the converging teams. But more than avoiding them, she was positioning herself for the next phase of her operation turning. Kane's tactical advantages against him. The hospital's pharmaceutical storage room was located on the second floor, secured behind reinforced doors and electronic locks that were designed to prevent drug theft. For Maria, who had spent years maintaining the hospital's security systems, the locks were merely an inconvenience. Inside the pharmaceutical storage, she found exactly what she needed: propofol, midazolam, and other sedatives that could be weaponized with the right delivery system. Her Special Forces medical training had included extensive study of chemical agents and their tactical applications. Tonight, that knowledge would prove invaluable. Working with the precision of someone who had performed similar tasks under combat conditions, Maria prepared several improvised devices using syringes, small oxygen canisters, and pharmaceutical compounds. The result was a collection of non-lethal weapons that could incapacitate targets without permanent harm, important when operating in a hospital filled with innocent people. As she worked, Kane's voice continued to echo through the hospital's communication system. "Maria, you're only delaying the inevitable. My men will find you, and when they do, everyone you've tried to protect will pay the price for your stubbornness." Maria keyed the pharmaceutical storage room's internal communication panel. "Kane, let me tell you what's really going to happen. In about 30 minutes, federal agents are going to arrive in response to the emergency signals I've been transmitting. They're going to find evidence of your illegal operation, recordings of your admissions to war crimes, and documentation of tonight's assault on a civilian hospital. Even if that's true, you'll be dead long before then. Maybe, but here's what you haven't figured out yet. I'm not trying to survive this, Kane. I'm trying to make sure you don't." The silence that followed her transmission lasted nearly a minute. When Kane spoke again, his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "What are you talking about?" "The files from Operation Silent Shield. They're not in a safety deposit box in Geneva. They're here, in this hospital, uploaded to servers that are programmed to release everything if I don't check in every 12 hours. If you kill me, the evidence goes public automatically." This was the truth that Maria had kept hidden for 8 years. The encrypted files containing evidence of Kane's betrayal weren't stored in some distant location. They were integrated into the hospital's own computer systems, disguised as routine maintenance logs and patient records. She had spent years carefully documenting Kane's activities, adding new evidence whenever she could access it through encrypted channels. "You're bluffing," Kane said, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "Check the hospital's medical database, Kane. Look for maintenance records filed under the name Victor Petrov. You remember Victor, don't you? The intelligence asset you tried to have killed 8 years ago." There was a pause, followed by urgent typing in the background of Kane's transmission. Maria knew he was accessing the hospital's computer systems, trying to verify her claims. What he would find was a carefully constructed digital trail that would lead him to realize the scope of her preparation. "Clever," Kane admitted after several minutes, "but you've made one crucial mistake." "Which is?" "You've told me where the files are located. All I have to do is destroy the hospital's computer systems and your insurance policy disappears." Maria smiled as she finished preparing her improvised weapons. "Kane, you always were better at tactics than strategy. Go ahead, destroy the hospital's computers. Shut down life support systems, erase patient records, eliminate the digital infrastructure that keeps 300 people alive. See how that plays with federal investigators." The communication went silent, and Maria knew she had backed Kane into an impossible position. He needed the files to protect himself from prosecution, but he couldn't destroy them without committing an act of domestic terrorism that would guarantee his downfall. But more than that, she had forced him to reveal his true priorities. Kane wasn't here to eliminate a security threat or protect classified information. He was here to save his own skin, and that desperation would make him sloppy. Maria left the pharmaceutical storage room and began moving toward the hospital's central corridor system. She had weapons, she had Kane psychologically off balance, and she had intimate knowledge of the battlefield. But most importantly, she had something that Kane's men lacked: a cause worth dying for. The people in the surgical suite weren't just civilians to protect. They were representatives of everything she had joined the military to defend. Dr. Rodriguez, who dedicated her life to healing others. The elderly man with chest pain, who reminded her of every veteran she had served alongside. The teenage girl with the broken arm, who represented the future that people like Kane were willing to sacrifice for personal gain. As she moved through the hospital's corridors, Maria's radio crackled with reports from Kane's teams. They had found the unconscious men she had left on the second floor. They were adapting their search patterns, becoming more cautious, more systematic, but they were also becoming more predictable. Professional soldiers followed training, and Maria knew their training as well as they did. Better, in some cases, she had helped develop the urban warfare protocols they were using. Team leaders, report positions, Kane ordered through the radio. Team 1, 3rd floor East Wing. Team 2, 2nd floor Central. Team 3, 1st floor West Wing. Maria processed their positions, calculating movement patterns and response times. Kane had made another mistake. He was keeping his teams too close together, reducing their search coverage while creating opportunities for her to eliminate multiple targets simultaneously. She keyed her radio one final time before discarding it entirely. Kane, you have 15 minutes to evacuate your men and leave the hospital. After that, I stop being surgical about this. Or what? Or you find out why they called me Lifeline and why that was the last thing a lot of people heard before they stopped breathing. Maria disappeared into the hospital's ventilation system, carrying her improvised weapons and 8 years of suppressed rage. Behind her, Kane's men were converging on her last known position. Ahead of her, the central corridor system offered multiple opportunities for tactical engagement. The hunt was about to become a battle, and Maria intended to make sure that when it was over, the only people walking out of St. Mary's Hospital would be the ones who deserved to survive. The central corridor of St. Mary's Hospital was a hub of activity during normal operations, connecting the emergency department to surgical suites, patient rooms, and administrative offices. Tonight, it had become a killing field where the most dangerous game was being played with surgical precision. Maria positioned herself in the ceiling space above the main corridor, watching through ventilation grates as Kane's 3 teams converged on her last known position. They moved with professional coordination, weapons ready, communication disciplined. But they were operating in an environment that favored her in ways they couldn't fully comprehend. The hospital's architectural design included numerous blind spots, structural supports that could provide cover, and emergency systems that could be weaponized by someone with the right knowledge. More importantly, Maria understood the psychological dynamics of the building, how sound carried, where shadows fell, what sightlines offered tactical advantages. Team 1 in position, the radio chatter indicated. No visual on target. Team 2 South Corridor secured. Team 3 maintaining overwatch on Central Hub. Maria smiled grimly. They were following standard urban warfare protocols, establishing fields of fire and limiting escape routes. It was exactly what she would have done in their position, which meant she knew exactly how to counter their tactics. She removed one of her improvised sedative devices, a small pressurized canister loaded with aerosolized propofol, and carefully positioned it in the ventilation system above Team 1's position. The hospital's air circulation system would distribute the sedative gradually, creating an effect similar to anesthetic gas used in surgical procedures. Within minutes, the radio chatter from Team 1 began to show signs of confusion and decreased alertness. Command Team 1 leader, we're having some difficulty maintaining focus. Possible chemical agent in the air supply. Team 1, evacuate to fresh air immediately, Kane ordered. All teams assume chemical warfare protocols. But it was too late for Team 1. The three operators collapsed within seconds of each other, their weapons clattering to the floor as the sedative took full effect. They would be unconscious for hours, but would suffer no permanent harm, a consideration that distinguished Maria's approach from Kane's willingness to kill innocent civilians. Team 1 report. Kane's voice carried increasing desperation. Team 1, respond. Maria dropped through a ceiling panel into the corridor, quickly collecting the unconscious men's weapons and equipment. Military-grade assault rifles, tactical communication devices, and enough ammunition to supply a small unit. But more valuable than the hardware was the intelligence she gathered from their radio traffic. Kane was operating from the hospital's administrative offices on the 4th floor, using the building's internal communication systems to coordinate his teams. He had positioned himself where he believed he would be safe from direct assault while maintaining command and control over the operation. It was a tactically sound decision that revealed both his military training and his fundamental weakness. Kane had always preferred to command from a distance, sending others to take risks while he remained protected. Tonight, that preference would prove fatal. Maria activated one of the captured radios and transmitted on Kane's command frequency. Kane, this is Lifeline. Your Team 1 is down but alive. They'll wake up with headaches and bruised egos, nothing more. You always were too soft, Maria. That's why you never made it past Sergeant. No, Kane, that's why I never became like you. She moved through the hospital corridors with increased confidence, knowing that Kane's tactical options were becoming limited. 2 teams remained active, but they were now operating under chemical warfare protocols that would slow their movement and reduce their effectiveness. More importantly, Maria was no longer simply evading capture. She was implementing a plan that would systematically eliminate Kane's advantages while forcing him into a direct confrontation where her knowledge of the hospital would be decisive. The pharmaceutical storage room had provided sedatives, but the hospital's medical equipment offered even more sophisticated options. Maria made her way to the cardiac catheterization laboratory, where specialized equipment used for heart procedures could be adapted for her purposes. The cath lab contained high-powered imaging equipment, precision instruments, and most importantly, a supply of emergency medications used for cardiac resuscitation. Among these was a collection of drugs that could affect heart rhythm, blood pressure, and nervous system function in very specific ways, working with the speed and precision of someone who had performed similar improvisations under combat conditions. Maria prepared several specialized devices using cardiac catheters, emergency medications, and components from the imaging equipment. The result was a collection of tools that could incapacitate targets with medical precision rather than brute force. As she worked, the hospital's internal communication system crackled with updates from Kane's remaining teams. Team 2, we've lost contact with Team 1. Recommend immediate evacuation. Team 3 concurs. This target has capabilities beyond initial assessment. Negative, Kane's voice cut through their concerns. Mission parameters remain unchanged. Target must be eliminated and files secured. Maria noted the fear in the voices of Kane's men. They were professional soldiers, but they were accustomed to operating against conventional opponents. The idea of facing someone who could turn a hospital into a tactical advantage was outside their training and experience. She keyed the cardiac lab's communication panel, broadcasting on the frequency that Kane's teams were monitoring. Teams 2 and 3, this is your target. Your commander is lying to you about this mission. Target is attempting psychological warfare, Kane immediately responded. Maintain radio discipline. Ask Kane about Operation Silent Shield, Maria continued. Ask him about the 8 Special Forces operators who died because he sold them out to enemy forces. Ask him about the weapons deals he's been running with terrorist organizations. Shut her down, Kane ordered, but Maria could hear uncertainty in the radio chatter from his remaining teams. Your mission tonight isn't about national security, she pressed. It's about covering up war crimes and protecting a traitor who's been selling American military technology to the highest bidder. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in tactical communications. When Kane's voice returned, it carried a note of desperation that confirmed Maria's psychological assessment. All teams, target is a convicted terrorist, wanted for attacks on American military personnel. Any communication from her is disinformation designed to compromise mission effectiveness. But the damage was done. Maria could hear the hesitation in the radio traffic from Teams 2 and 3. Professional soldiers were trained to follow orders, but they were also trained to recognize when those orders came from compromised leadership. She left the cardiac catheterization laboratory and began moving toward the hospital's 4th floor, carrying her specialized equipment and a detailed plan for ending Kane's operation permanently. The time for cat-and-mouse games was over. It was time for the direct confrontation that had been 8 years in the making. Behind her, Kane's remaining teams were dealing with the realization that their mission might not be what they had been told. Ahead of her, Kane himself was entrenched in the administrative offices, surrounded by communication equipment and protected by layers of security. But Maria had spent 8 years learning every inch of St. Mary's Hospital, including the maintenance passages, utility corridors, and service elevators that could bypass conventional security measures. Kane might have superior numbers and firepower, but he was fighting on her territory against an opponent who understood that sometimes the most effective weapon wasn't a gun, it was the truth. The final phase of Operation Silent Shield was about to begin, and this time, Maria intended to make sure that justice would be as precise and unavoidable as the surgical procedures she had once performed to save lives in the world's most dangerous places. The 4th floor of St. Mary's Hospital housed the administrative offices, conference rooms, and executive suites that formed the bureaucratic heart of the medical center. During normal business hours, it buzzed with the activity of hospital management, insurance coordinators, and medical administrators. Tonight, it had become Colonel David Kane's command center, and, if Maria had her way, his tomb. She accessed the 4th floor through a service elevator that opened into a maintenance area behind the main administrative suite. 8 years of routine janitorial work had given her master keys to virtually every room in the hospital, including areas that were supposed to be restricted to senior staff. The maintenance area provided direct access to the building's utility systems, electrical panels, communication junction boxes, and the environmental controls that regulated temperature, lighting, and air circulation throughout the floor. Maria began her assault on Kane's position by systematically disrupting these systems, creating an environment that favored her tactical advantages while eliminating his. The lights went out first, plunging the administrative floor into darkness, except for the pale glow of emergency lighting. Then the air conditioning shut down, followed by the communication trunk lines that connected the 4th floor to the rest of the hospital's internal network. What the hell is happening? Kane's voice echoed through the corridors, no longer transmitted through radio but shouted in frustration as his command and control systems failed. Around him, Maria moved through the darkened corridors with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years operating in hostile territory. She knew the layout of the administrative floor as well as she knew her own apartment, having cleaned these offices thousands of times during her night shifts. Kane had positioned himself in the hospital administrator's office, the largest room, on the floor with multiple windows and 2 separate exits. It was a defensible position that offered good sight lines and escape routes. But it was also a position that could be isolated and contained by someone who understood the building's infrastructure, working with practiced efficiency. Maria sealed the emergency exits using techniques she had learned during urban warfare training. Fire doors could be secured with simple improvised devices that would hold against everything except explosive breaches. Air vents could be blocked to prevent escape through the building's ductwork. Within minutes, Kane's defensive position had become a trap. Teams 2 and 3 report to the 4th floor immediately, Kane ordered through his tactical radio. But Maria had already cut the communication lines that connected the administrative floor to the rest of the hospital. His orders were echoing in an electronic void. She positioned herself outside the administrator's office, using the shadows and her intimate knowledge of the building's layout to remain invisible while observing Kane's movements through the window. In the office door, Kane was alone, which surprised her. She had expected him to keep bodyguards or additional security personnel close by. But as she watched him pacing the office, checking his radio and attempting to re-establish communication with his teams, she realized that his isolation was deliberate. Kane had never been a hands-on leader. He preferred to command from a distance, using others to take risks while he remained safe and protected. Tonight, that preference had left him vulnerable in ways he didn't fully understand. Maria tested the office door locked, but not with anything that could stop someone with her skills and tools. She could breach the room in seconds, but that would give Kane time to respond with whatever weapons he carried. Better to draw him out, force him into a confrontation on her terms. She activated the office's internal communication system, broadcasting her voice through speakers that Kane couldn't shut off without leaving his defensive position. "Hello, Kane. Comfortable in there?" Kane spun toward the nearest speaker, his sidearm drawn and ready. "Maria, I was wondering when you'd finally show yourself. I've been here the whole time. You just haven't been looking in the right places." Clever tactics, shutting down the power and communications. "But you're still outnumbered. My men will find a way to reach this floor. Your men are unconscious, traumatized, or questioning their orders. You're alone, Kane, just like you were when you decided to betray your own people 8 years ago." Through the window, Maria could see Kane's jaw tighten. He moved to the office's main desk, using it as cover while keeping his weapon trained on the door. "Operation Silent Shield was a necessary sacrifice," he said. "Sometimes good soldiers die so that important objectives can be achieved." "What objectives? Your bank account? Your promotion to colonel? The weapons deals you've been running with terrorist organizations? You always were too idealistic, Maria. Too focused on individual lives to see the bigger picture." Maria moved closer to the office door, testing its security while maintaining her position in the shadows. "The bigger picture? Let me tell you about the bigger picture, Kane. Viktor Petrov's intelligence didn't just implicate you, it exposed an entire network of military contractors who were selling American weapons to hostile foreign governments. Intelligence that was supposed to be contained and controlled. Controlled by murdering the people who risked their lives to obtain it." Kane's laughter echoed through the communication system. "Maria, you still don't understand. Viktor Petrov wasn't a whistleblower trying to expose corruption. He was a foreign intelligence asset trying to compromise American military operations. Operation Silent Shield was designed to eliminate him and recover the intelligence he had stolen." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. For 8 years, she had believed that her team had died protecting evidence of Kane's corruption. The possibility that they had actually died protecting American national security from foreign infiltration was a psychological weapon more devastating than any physical assault. But even as doubt crept into her mind, Maria's training took over. Interrogation and psychological manipulation were standard tactics in special operations. Kane was trying to destabilize her, make her question her own motivations and memories. "If that's true," she said quietly, "then why did you spend 8 years hunting down the survivors of your own team?" "Because you and Tommy Martinez refused to accept the classified nature of the operation. You kept evidence that could compromise ongoing intelligence activities. Evidence of your financial transactions with arms dealers. Evidence of weapons. Shipments to terrorist organizations. Evidence of American soldiers dying because you sold them out for profit." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. When Kane spoke again, his voice carried a note of resignation that suggested he was finished with deception. "Maria, even if everything you believe is true, what do you think you can accomplish here? You kill me, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. You let me go, and I disappear. Either way, the people responsible for your team's deaths will never face justice." "Wrong, Kane. There's a third option." Maria stepped out of the shadows and into the pale glow of the emergency lighting, allowing Kane to see her clearly for the first time in 8 years. She stood in the corridor outside his office, carrying no visible weapons, her hands empty, but ready. "The third option is that you confess everything, the corruption, the betrayals, the murders, and you do it while being recorded by the same systems you've been using to communicate with your teams." Kane raised his weapon, training it on Maria through the office window. "You're assuming I have something to confess. I'm assuming you want to live through the next 10 minutes. The final confrontation that had been 8 years in the making was about to begin. Kane had superior firepower and defensive position. Maria had superior knowledge of the battlefield and moral certainty about her cause. But more than that, she had something that Kane had lost years ago, the absolute conviction that some things were worth dying for, and some people were worth killing to protect. The administrator's office had become an arena where justice would be decided not by courts and lawyers, but by the woman who had never stopped being a soldier, even when she was pretending to be invisible. The standoff lasted exactly 37 seconds, long enough for Kane to realize that his tactical position wasn't as strong as he had believed, and for Maria to confirm that 8 years of suppressed rage could be channeled into surgical precision. When the moment demanded it, Kane fired first, his shot shattering the office window as Maria moved with fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. The bullet passed through empty air where she had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. She rolled, came up behind a structural pillar, and used the momentum to launch one of her improvised medical devices with accuracy that would have impressed her old instructors. The device, a modified cardiac catheter loaded with a precise dose of sedative, struck Kane in the neck with the force and accuracy of a dart. He had perhaps 3 seconds to understand what had happened before the medication took effect, dropping him unconscious with the same clinical efficiency that Maria had once used to save lives on distant battlefields. Maria entered the office cautiously, her training demanding that she verify the threat was neutralized before relaxing her guard. Kane was breathing normally, his pulse steady but slow. He would be unconscious for several hours, but would suffer no permanent harm, a consideration that distinguished her from the man who had murdered her teammates. She secured Kane's weapon and checked his tactical equipment, finding encrypted communication devices, classified documents, and financial records that would provide additional evidence of his criminal activities. But more important than the physical evidence was what she found on his encrypted satellite phone communication logs that revealed the scope of his network and the identities of his co-conspirators. The phone contained messages from arms dealers, foreign intelligence services, and military contractors who had been part of the conspiracy that destroyed Operation Silent Shield. Names, dates, financial transactions, and operational details that could bring down an entire network of corruption within the military-industrial complex. Maria photographed everything, uploading the images to secure servers through encrypted Channels that would ensure the evidence reached the right people, even if something happened to her. But more than gathering evidence, she was finally understanding the true scope of what Kane had been trying to hide. Operation Silent Shield hadn't been a simple intelligence-gathering mission. It had been designed to expose a network of American military contractors who were selling weapons and classified technology to hostile foreign governments. Viktor Petrov had been a double agent, officially working for foreign intelligence, but actually gathering evidence for American authorities who suspected corruption within their own ranks. Kane's betrayal hadn't just resulted in the deaths of 8 Special Forces operators. It had allowed a network of arms dealers to continue selling American military technology to terrorist organizations, resulting in countless additional deaths over the following 8 years. The weight of this realization settled over Maria like a physical burden. Her team hadn't died protecting evidence of Kane's corruption. They had died because Kane was protecting a corruption network that continued to threaten American national security. The evidence she had been hiding could have prevented years of additional violence and death. She activated the office's emergency communication system and began transmitting on frequencies monitored by federal law enforcement agencies. The message was simple but comprehensive: identification of her location, summary of the evidence she had gathered, and a request for immediate federal response to what she was classifying as a national security emergency. The response came within minutes. Federal agencies had been tracking unusual activity at St. Mary's Hospital since Maria had begun transmitting emergency signals hours earlier. Teams from the FBI, DI, and military criminal investigation units were already en route, coordinated through joint task forces that specialize in investigating military corruption. As Maria waited for federal agents to arrive, she made her way back to the surgical suite where Dr. Rodriguez and the other civilians were sheltering. The hospital's normal lighting and communication systems had been restored, and the oppressive atmosphere of danger was beginning to lift. She found Dr. Rodriguez checking on the patients with her usual professional competence, but the doctor's eyes showed the strain of the night's events. The elderly man with chest pain was stable, his cardiac rhythms normal despite the stress. The teenage girl with the broken arm was helping organize medical supplies, her young resilience already adapting to the extraordinary circumstances. "Is it over?" Dr. Rodriguez asked quietly. "It's over," Maria confirmed. "Federal agents will be here within the hour. Kane is unconscious but alive, and his men are either neutralized or fled." "And you? What happens to Maria Santos, the janitor?" Maria smiled sadly. Maria Santos never really existed. She was just a cover story, a way for someone else to hide from a past that finally caught up with her. Dr. Rodriguez studied her face in the pale surgical lighting. "So who are you really?" "Someone who spent 8 years learning that running from the truth doesn't make it go away. Someone who discovered that the best way to honor the dead is to make sure their deaths weren't meaningless." Over the next several hours, St. Mary's Hospital was transformed into a federal crime scene as investigators from multiple agencies began the process of documenting Kane's operation and gathering evidence of the broader conspiracy. Maria found herself at the center of debriefings that would continue for weeks, providing testimony that would be crucial for prosecuting not just Kane, but the entire network he had been protecting. The encrypted files she had hidden in the hospital's computer systems were extracted and analyzed, revealing financial transactions, operational communications, and strategic plans that implicated dozens of individuals in military contracting firms, foreign intelligence services, and government oversight positions. Kane himself, when he regained consciousness, proved to be surprisingly cooperative once he realized the scope of the evidence against him. Faced with charges that could result in life imprisonment or execution for treason, he agreed to provide testimony against his co-conspirators in exchange for a plea agreement that would spare his life. The investigation that followed would eventually expose corruption networks operating in multiple countries, result in the arrest of more than 40 individuals, and lead to reforms in military contracting procedures that would prevent similar betrayals in the future. But for Maria, the most important outcome was simpler. The 8 members of her Special Forces team who had died during Operation Silent Shield were finally recognized as heroes who had given their lives in service of American national security. Their names were added to memorials, their families received proper recognition and benefits, and their sacrifice was acknowledged by the same government that had once denied their existence. 3 months after the events at St. Mary's Hospital, Maria Vasquez received a presidential commendation for her role in exposing the conspiracy and preventing continued threats to national security. She accepted the award in a private ceremony, away from media attention that could compromise ongoing investigations. But she also received something more meaningful, a letter from Tommy Martinez's mother, thanking her for ensuring that her son's death had meaning and that his killers would face justice. Maria returned to Chicago after the ceremony, but not to St. Mary's Hospital. The building held too many memories of violence and betrayal, despite the justice that had emerged from the darkness. Instead, she found work at a veterans medical center on the south side of the city, providing care for soldiers who had returned from the same kinds of operations that had once defined her life. She was no longer invisible, but she was finally at peace. The woman who had spent 8 years hiding from her past had learned that the only way to truly escape the shadows was to shine light into them, no matter how much it hurt to see what had been hidden there. And in the quiet corridors of the Veterans Medical Center, Maria Vasquez no longer lifelined the soldier, no longer Maria Santos the janitor, but simply someone who had learned that healing and fighting were sometimes the same thing, continued the work of saving lives, one patient at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.